everyone, and welcome to our program today. I'm Rena Pawlow, your host for the next 90 minutes as we further explore issues in online teaching and learning. This program, Pedagogy 202 for Distance Learning, is a continuation of our program earlier in the season, Pedagogy 201 for Distance Learning, Enhancing Interactivity. I had the pleasure at that time of joining our host, Peter Shea, and two colleagues, Netta DeBog, and my co-author, Keith Pratt, who I know is out there watching the show today, as we discussed how to develop and sustain online interaction to improve online teaching. These programs are a continuation of last season's popular series, Pedagogy 101 and 102. And if you are a first-time viewer today, you may want to check out these past programs by visiting Starlink's website at www.starlinktraining.org. Today, we'll be tackling ways to approach student outcomes and assessment at a distance, a challenging and some may say even contentious issue. Traditionally, assessment of learning in higher education has relied heavily on the demonstration of retention of knowledge as measured by paper and pencil tests and quizzes. Today, with distance learning leading the way, assessment is taking on new meaning. As online distance learning courses continue to grow, an understanding and validation of alternative forms of student assessment is in greater demand. In this program, with the help of our panel and your participation, we will explore the pedagogical issues and concerns surrounding online assessment, its many applications, and how to enhance student participation in learning. In a moment, I'll introduce our panelists, but first let me remind you, your participation and interaction are key. We welcome your comments and questions throughout the program. You may participate at any time, one of three ways: by calling us at 1-800-745-0371 to speak to us live, fax us at 972-669-6633, or email at starlink@dcccd.edu. These numbers and the email address can also be found on page 4 of Starlink's participant packet. You may want to pull that page out along with the fax question sheet on page 5 for easier reference, because we want to encourage you to ask us questions and talk with us directly. Let's begin with an introduction of today's panelists. Joining us today all the way from Vancouver, Canada, is Dr. Linda Harrison. Linda is a professor in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University and the former CEO of Canada's Telelearning Network of Centres of Excellence. You are most likely familiar with Linda's work, as she is a recognized international expert and pioneer in distance education in the areas of design and delivery, spanning over 25 years. In fact, some of Linda's early writing helped to inspire the work that Keith and I did. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Rena. I'm really pleased to be here.
We are also fortunate to have with us today Alice Bedard Voorhees, Associate Academic Dean of Colorado Community Colleges Online, which encompasses 13 member colleges in Colorado and includes colleges in Montana and Missouri. This year, the League for Innovation in the Community College named Alice the first Patricia Cross Papers Fellow. Congratulations, Alice, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Rena. It's terrific to be here.
Dr. Badrul Khan is also an international speaker, author, educator, and consultant in the field of online learning and educational technology. His latest books, Managing E-Learning Strategies and E-Learning Quick Checklist, are translated in over 10 languages. He's an associate professor of the Educational Technology Leadership Program at George Washington University and founder of bookstoread.com, a recommended reading site on the internet. Welcome, Badrul.
I'm very pleased to be here today with you all.
You can learn more about any one of us by visiting our biographies on page 7 and 8 of the participant print packet. which also includes examples of our writings and information relevant to our program today. As in past pedagogy programs, we will once again use a technique often used to stimulate both online and offline discussion, called case or scenario-based learning. This afternoon, we will be examining 8 short video scenarios to assist us in discussing ideas and approaches to online assessment among ourselves and hopefully with you. Also in the packet, you may want to pull out the worksheets for scenarios starting on page 9 for you to take some notes. This will also make it easier to refer back to the packet as each participant speaks to his or her materials. Before our first video scenario, let's briefly familiarize those watching with some of our personal approaches to online assessment. Linda, you're one of the pioneers in shaping online and online distance learning. How do you see the field has changed, and where do you see us today?
Well, I think we're at a really exciting moment in the field of online distance learning. It's a real breakthrough. E-learning is becoming prevalent, and in fact it's going mainstream. So it's really incumbent on us as instructors to look at new ways of assessing the new ways of teaching and learning. And fortunately, online collaborative learning provides us with an immense number of new tools that can really assist instructors in doing that. Most importantly, what we can see, especially in online discussions, since online discussions are text-based, is we get to see frozen thought. What students are saying is what they're thinking, and since online they have to write these as messages, as instructors, we can really study what they're learning, what they're understanding, and perhaps where they're misunderstanding or where there's miscomprehension. It may feel intimidating to contemplate assessment in this new environment, but what we should really understand is there's a plethora of new resources, new tools and methods that today our panel is going to be addressing that can really help instructors feel confident and in addressing and assessing effective learning online.
Thanks, Linda. Alice, how about some of your thoughts on assessment?
I think that, as Linda says, that there are some real opportunities to understand how assessment and the use of these tools are beneficial for both faculty and learners, and that one of the sources that can remind us of some of those practices come from the list of best practices published by American Association of Higher Education. Among those are a couple practices such as that assessment is a vehicle for learning, not just an end in itself, and that it's important that it is ongoing. Additionally, that there's attention given to the learning experience, not just to the outcome or the assessment activity itself, and that a supportive environment, meaning good intent related to the learning and the assessment, makes all the difference. In addition to that, Carol Twigg, in her Beyond No Significant Difference, says that the difference for us then as faculty is that we make assessment part of the learning experience, not an interruption to it.
And yet some instructors still believe that they can simply take traditionally based classroom approaches and move them over to their online environment. Badrul, you've been researching this question for many years. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, thank you. I think it's an excellent question. As you see, that online learning environment is completely different than face-to-face environment. There are issues that we have on online learning. The learners are remote and they are diverse culturally, geographically, with their different background and learning styles. So we are dealing with a challenging situation in online environment. And since '97, I've been researching this question: what does it take to create meaningful learning environments for diverse learners worldwide? Well, with my research, I found there are so many issues, and these are very critical issues. And I clustered these issues in 8 dimensions, which you can see on the page 24, a model that I created I call a framework for e-learning, or you could call it framework for online learning. I will just briefly go through the issues surrounding this framework to make sure that while you are designing these online courses, it should be designed meaningfully so we can do the appropriate assessment of what we are teaching students. Now, in the pedagogical sections, always we are concerned about that where what kind of pedagogical philosophy the instructor should have. Is it like an instructor role? Would it be a more facilitative, or are you going to be didactic? Now let's move on to technology. We are very concerned about in online learning, bandwidth is a bigger issue. So we have to see the infrastructure, how the students are dialing up, or they are using the high-speed cable modem or internet. So we have to be concerned about those issues. And the next, we have a situation like interface design. This is a fascinating area. It's got to do with cross-cultural communication. With the blessing of internet and digital technologies, now we can offer courses all over the world. More we can offer all over the world, we have more issues. One of the issues, like I'm originally from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, thumbs up means I disregard you, I challenge you. In the Western culture, it means way to go. See, it's cross-cultural communication, this sign and symbol you use on online courses. If someone get the answer right and he is in Bangladesh, and getting a feedback with thumbs up might be not very good. The same way you can see as you move along on this framework, evaluation. In face-to-face classes, we only evaluate people who are teaching the class. But in online education, there's a group of people involved in online education. They are instructor, they are subject matter expert, they are technical support, there are counselor, there are administrator, all these people, they need to be evaluated and how they're working, because all we care, I'm advocating, advocates for learners. Are we providing them the meaningful learning? And then move on to the next is a resource support. Do they have 24 hours, 7 days a week resource support? The next one is ethical. You have to be very ethically, very competent in teaching online. If you want to have live chat room scheduled, and if you have students from all over the United States, within the United States we have 6 time zones. So someone would not be so interested waking up 5 in the morning if you set up a chat room that in DC will be 7 in the morning, or it will be 8 in the morning. So you see that geographical diversity is an issue that we have to be considering. And in institutional dimension, people always asking this question, the online, that my son taking this class, is it as good as he would have gotten if he was taking the face-to-face classes? Well, then you have to design it such a way that you don't get kind of questions. You might answer this. Now, my whole idea of bringing this framework and linking it to assessment is basically to see we are asking a student to perform, but at the same time, we have to do our work, is creating meaningful learning environment, even addressing the issues I talked about around these 8 dimensions, so that students feel good and learning happens and an instructor enjoy teaching these courses. So I feel very excited to be able to share these thoughts on the assessment. I think it's a very important topic.
Thanks, Badrul. Those are great examples. What seems to be emerging from our discussion at this point is that the purpose and process of assessment has changed relative to the opportunities provided by these new technologies. And it seems to be focusing on 4 key points. The first is that assessment and evaluation should be collaborative. In other words, we need to be involving our students in the assessment and evaluation of the work that they're doing. It needs to be authentic, meaning that it needs to be based in the real world. When we have students experiencing all kinds of different experiences around the globe, that has to somehow be factored into our assessment. It reflects competency achievement. And finally, it takes many forms. It's not just exams and quizzes. We have all kinds of ways of evaluating now, thanks to technology. Before watching our first scenario, let me remind you that we want you to interact with us and add to our discussion today. We promise we won't be grading you, but there may be a pop quiz later, so be prepared for that. If you have questions about these approaches or any of our ideas, just give us a call, fax, or email us anytime during this program. You can contact us one of 3 ways: by calling 745-0371 to speak to us live. Fax us at 972-669-6633, or email your comments and questions to starlink@dcccd.edu. So now let's begin with our first scenario, assessing online discussion.
By incorporating effective discussion activities such as online seminars, debates, and case analysis, an instructor has noticed an increase in his students' motivation and participation. However, he struggles with the lack of definition as to what determines observable, measurable discussion qualities that support learning and conceptual change. How can he effectively grade online discussion to support these processes?
Linda, let's start with you. How can we effectively grade online discussion to support these processes?
Well, I use a rubric that identifies various indicators of success. And this rubric, which is, I think, in the package on page 37, but I won't go into the details, the rubric is based on a theory of collaborative learning. What constitutes good learning? So I translated that into rubrics of measurables so that I can look through the student discussion and then use this rubric to actually assess it. And it's based on learning theory. So research shows this is how people learn best. Here's the indicators of how they learn best. And then I translate that into ways of studying the discourse. And as I mentioned earlier, because the student discussion is online, that's very powerful, both for the students in having effective discussion, but also for we as instructors, for us as instructors, because there's a verbatim transcript that's archived in the system that has all the student comments. So we can follow along both at the same time or retrospectively and study the discourse, study where it's moving ahead, decide if it needs to be promoted or advanced, and especially to assess it using the rubrics. In developing the theory of learning that I've put forward in this package and the rubrics, my intent was really to help instructors with an easy-to-use and very doable system for assessment so that it isn't that complicated and it is based on learning theory so they can really feel confident that they're having an opportunity to study not only right or wrong answers, but learning as conceptual change.
Great. Linda mentioned rubrics. For those of you who may not be familiar with the concept of grading rubrics, let's try to explain this in a little more detail. Alice, can you add to this discussion?
Actually, in addition to what Linda says about making the work doable, I think it helps to say what is it about a rubric that makes it doable. And first of all, as a basic definition, a rubric is a list of characteristics that define what is observable in this case, in online participation. And in the criteria that are provided there, both for learner and faculty, things like higher levels of thinking, processing content, all of those can be promoted by the listing of those characteristics. In the packet, I've provided two examples. Those are on page 16 and 17. And one thing that the viewers might find interesting about those bearing rubrics is that they list goals for discussion in those courses. And those goals could even change with specific types of discussions in the course along a term. But the point here is that a course in writing may use discussion, may have a goal for the discussion to forward points about what is involved in doing good writing, as well as defending a written viewpoint to other people, while a course for educational practitioners, for example, might include a goal that is to share their own applications in their practice with other members of the class as they build content.
Alice, I'm wondering, are rubrics the only means by which to grade discussion?
I would say there are a couple qualifications, and one would be anonymous Q&A discussions, and another one that comes to mind for me is orientation to the online class itself.
Linda, any additional thoughts on that?
Well, I'd agree with Alice, and I think we need to emphasize that while rubrics are really helpful for assessing discussion, there's not one form of assessment that fits all. There's many forms of assessment, and students will also take part in many different roles, and those different activities will require different forms of assessment. So while rubrics are really helpful in discussions, there might be other activities or applications that rubrics aren't that helpful for.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the activities that I do in my online courses is that I encourage students to use blogs, weblogs, reflecting on their thoughts as the course proceeds. And I don't grade those. I will assign participation points to encourage students to use their blog, but I won't grade their reflections. Badrul, what are some of the other challenges of online grading that you can think about?
Well, in our online teaching, you will see some students post more frequently than others. And it is the quality that we are looking for, not the quantity. So you have to keep reminding our students that they need to be very focused, and each posting and each response that they do online has to be with quality, focus, has to be written in a way that others can learn from it. So if someone is not posting as much as other, we should not assume that someone is posting more frequently, learning or getting more learning experience from this discussion than others. We can assume that. But as faculty, I know it's challenging to and it's time consuming, keep reminding students they should be on focus and respond appropriately to each questions, but it has to be done. We have to keep reminding them it's the quality that counts, not the quantity.
We've received an email question, and Badrul, I think you might be the one to handle this one first. The question is, should you decide on the kinds of activities first and then try to find a way to measure achievement? Or should you decide on assessments first and then find activities to support them?
I think it depends on your pedagogical philosophy. Like if you are more like a facilitative versus you are more like an instructivist. If you are really facilitating, you would probably combine them both. You should have an overall goal, not objectives, that this is in a specific topic. You want to have a meaningful dialogue going and the student can learn from it. So I think having a goal and then you can design it accordingly to the goal. And if they can achieve their goal, then I think the assessment is done. I'm not really talking about a specific objectives, it's an overall goal. So I hope I answered these questions. Go ahead.
Alice, do you have any additional thoughts on this one? Assessments first and then design around the assessments, or the opposite?
I think that a person might have some original ideas that would say, well, I know what the outcome is, so I'm going to design the assessment and then go back, but I can see it also working the other way. I think that it's a check and balance process. So that, bottom line, I don't think the order is necessarily set in all cases.
We have another emailed question, and this is from Colette at UNT Research Park. How do you grade with a rubric and not lose too much time reading assignments? It's actually two questions. And do you have a coding process to browse comments posted by students? Linda, I think maybe you might want to respond to this.
Well, I think that's really a good question, because on the one hand, while we can do better assessment, we can really study learning and understanding, conceptual change, there's the whole teacher workload issue. How much time goes into it? And that's what frankly, I've been struggling with for the last several years as we try to take our research instruments and make them useful for instructors. So I have created a rubric here for studying discussion, online discussion, and I've tried to put in some relatively easy to study indicators as well as some that have more depth. Like Badrul is saying, certainly we want to focus on quality, and I emphasize that with the students, and I do have qualitative indicators, and that's more heavily weighted in the grading. But also, I also grade quantity. To some degree. I want them to participate. I want them to participate regularly. I want them not only to write, but to be active readers, because active learning involves both. So I study that. How often are they logging on? They get 1 point for logging on at the beginning of a class and towards the middle of the online class to respond to others. They get a point for reading everyone's messages. They get a point for writing at least 4 substantive. And then I have points for the quality of the message. So, and that's my first kick at the can. I hope we can make it more easy and more doable, because then teachers will really teach to learning and understanding as opposed to teaching to retention, which is what quizzes study. So I invite all of you to give me feedback or to share your new tools with us. And we're just sort of at the tip of the iceberg, but
and again, there's more information in the packet that you've provided around the issue of rubrics.
And I would add to Linda that it really, that process of assessing the participation can vary with the faculty role too, because a great deal of the discussions that I do are actually related to are facilitative in nature. So in the facilitation that's going on with a given topic, I'm already getting a sense of the learning that's being demonstrated there. And I think that particular type of interaction actually speeds up the awarding of points and using of the rubric because of that engagement that's already occurred in that model.
Great. This is clearly an interesting topic, but it's time for us to move on now to our next scenario. So now let's look at how to assess group work online. The next scenario is entitled Grading Student Collaboration.
A professor teaching a course online has given her students a collaborative assignment based on small group activities. Many students are actively involved, but she is concerned that a few may not be carrying their weight in the group. She is concerned how she can address possible inequities in the level and quality of student collaboration. How can she effectively and fairly grade collaborative assignments?
Although we know that online discussion itself is collaborative, in this scenario we presented course activities that require students to work together to produce a group result. This is what we mean by collaborative assignment in this particular instance. So how can this instructor effectively and fairly grade collaborative assignments? Alice, your thoughts?
Well, I think that the very opening remark on this says that oftentimes we avoid group work because of its particular challenges. And yet people like Cindy Wilson and Cynthia Miles with the League for Innovations did bring forward that how important group work is in the 21st century learning model as something that people will also be using in the outside world. So there are many models that exist for us, and as Linda pointed out in earlier remarks, that yes, we do have some great resources available to us, and there are some on page 22 of our packet today. And part of setting up those models is about creating expectations. So some groups may need more direction and others less, and I think also even where a group project is placed in a particular term can help us determine what kind of expectations for the group we are going to present. For those of you who might have heard this name, Carl Smith from the University of Minnesota is a person who has written widely on this topic and developed some materials with 2 other authors, Johnson and Johnson, that really do look at the nuts and bolts of collaboration. Another issue that comes up with with group work is how do we grade this? And there are actually, two parts. Some is process and some is product. And I'll be remarking on that, I think, in a little bit. But I'd like to ask other people what their insights are on this experience.
How about you, Linda?
Well, I certainly agree that what we're doing today with online collaborative learning is we're creating a new culture, a new set of expectations, and requiring a new set of skills. And that's both for the instructor and for the student. So everyone's learning what is my role, what is appropriate for me or not in online collaborative learning. I think the role of the instructor, and I think we as instructors need a lot more support in what is our role and how do we support effective collaborative learning. But from an assessment point of view, our job is to help the students understand what the expectations are, what are the norms, what processes to help them conduct the collaborative projects, and really help them learn. Once they've taken a few online courses, this becomes second nature, but initially it isn't. So we have to set that context and create that culture and that mindset. But I think, and so there is a lot of responsibility on our part. But I'm going to raise something that may be a bit contentious or controversial, but I do think there's a limit to what we should expect or be expected to do as an instructor supporting collaborative work. And we can facilitate it, we can support it, we can help students problem solve. But one of the most important lessons I learned a few years ago was that I don't go in and try to fix every problem. Students need to learn how to solve problems. In the real workplace, they will be. So they're not going to always have someone there telling them the right answer. It is a process. And we have to also feel comfortable in saying to the students, do what you can to solve the problem. If you're willing to live with it, live with it. But if it's a real problem, come to me and I'll help, I'll coach. But I'm not going to intervene and fix all of the issues. And I think that's really important.
I agree, Linda, completely. I think our role really is more of a coach. You mentioned coaching. I think that rather than going in and fixing the problems, coaching them so that they know how to solve those problems themselves is really important. I know in my classes, I wait to be invited in. I don't just jump in if I see a problem. I wait to be invited in, and I'm very clear about that in my expectations. We have a fax or an email, that came in from Gay at University of North Texas, asking an interesting question, which is, what definitions are we using for assessment and evaluation in the world of online instruction, and how are those different? Badrul, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, when I talk about evaluation of online learning, I'm thinking about evaluation of all individuals involved in providing the online services. That includes evaluation of instructor, evaluation of technical support, evaluation of counseling, registration, library support, all other support services. When I talk about assessment, I talk about assessment of learners. So yes, that's what I would think the difference between evaluation of online learning environment and other one would be assessment of learners.
Right, right. I think that we do have a tendency to mix those terms up and use them inappropriately, and I would agree with you. Assessment is the learner, and evaluation is more of the environment and the overall course or program. Yeah. Great. Okay. We've been talking a little bit about collaboration and some of the challenges of group grading. What are some of the techniques that might work for group grading? Thoughts on that, Alice?
One of the I guess schemes that I support is a two-part grade, and then there are some pieces as to what it communicates about group projects as well. And what we can look at is, again, process and product, so that the group might be the determiners of the grade around the process, and then the group would receive that grade, but the faculty would be the evaluator, or I'm sorry, determiner of the grade for the product itself. And even the percentage assigned to, say, the process over the product would be the faculty's choice to communicate what about this learning experience is important or most important.
You know, it's interesting that you raise the two-part example. I just had a very interesting experience with an online class where I had students divided into groups of 3 to do presentations. And I asked them to do just what you were asking, which was to send me a private email assessing their own performance and the performance of the members of the group. And I had one group where each individual sent me an email. One student was very different from the other 2. And he said that one of the other students didn't do the work, but the other 2 students did not support that assessment. So it can become tricky sometimes in terms of if you get very disparate kind of feedback from a group of students, how to make sense out of that. Do you average the grade? Do you have conversations with the student to try to figure out what really happened here? How do you, as the instructor, kind of be the last word in how that assessment occurs? So it can be tricky. But Drew, I think you had some ideas about how you might deal with a situation like that.
Thank you, because I have faced some situation like that. What I have come up with a mechanism, I give them group private space in the learning management system. And there they have goals and assign tasks for individual member. So they can interact with them and communicate through this group space. And I can also go and see what they are doing. If I see there are areas that assigned tasks not been done by an individual member, I would send a private message. So my early intervention helps. So, and maybe someone is not responding or doing the task or learning task. Maybe they are confused. They don't have enough information. So what I try to do, I try to send private email, even go into the private space with their permission, that I put feedback. You're doing good. This is how you do it. So I think early interventions kind of solve that problem. So you bring the group dynamics together, and they will be more collaborative than they are complaining about each other.
Linda, does early intervention always work?
It used to. At least in my experience, it's been great. Like in the 80s and 90s, when we had students doing group projects, I did the same thing, opening up a conference space just for those students to work in as a team. So only I and the team members had access to this space. It was useful for me in terms of following the work and intervening. And also, should there have been a dispute like who did the work and who wasn't there, I had a transcript of what was going on. And this has worked even until sort of recently, but this semester, reality hit in quite a significant way. I always offer the students this workspace, but they also use other mechanisms. They use email, of course. They use cell phones. They use instant messaging. They use MSN. They use all sorts of other new technologies that are parcel of their everyday way of communicating. And they aren't they're not refusing, they're just not doing, and they're not being constrained in this space where they can be tracked. So I think we are going to have to look for new ways of doing that, because while it was very handy and very useful, I think even if we try to oblige them to do it, it's going to be hard. They are becoming these new millennials, or whatever we want to call it. They do use, and they're used to using, a variety of communication technologies. And I think we're going to have to evolve quickly to
Great.
to be with them.
Thanks. A reminder, we're taking your calls throughout the program, so please feel free to give us a call anytime, 1-800-745-0371, or fax your questions to 972-669-6633, or by email to starlink@dcccd.edu. Okay, let's move on to our next scenario at this point. This is regarding the student as the teacher.
An instructor understands that oftentimes in an online collaborative learning environment, students benefit more from giving help rather than receiving it. In his course, he encourages his students to act as facilitators for discussion, lead seminars, and give peer feedback. What techniques can he use to assess student-led activities?
So, Badrul, what techniques do you use to assess student-led activities?
It all depends on how well you prepare your students. In my classes, what I do, I ask students to do some research on their assigned discussion moderation. See, I assign a student to moderate the discussion topics. So they do some research and they submit some of the questions they want to run into discussion forum, and I negotiate with them. And I even advise them on those questions. And then what I do, I tell them that, are you comfortable with these questions? Can you generate enough discussions? And what can you contribute? After this negotiation, we are able to arrive at a point where we can have final discussion questions. After that, I ask them to do some resources, link to some resources that, while a student asking questions, you can always point them to those resource websites. And I also give them some tips on how to be a better successful moderator. And they can also check up those links. Our practitioner or field have created enormous resources, so they can visit those. And when the discussion is going on, I stay away from it, let them have a natural discussion going on, and they do a pretty good job. And I'm very happy they do it, because it's our homework as an instructor. We give them the good guidelines. But if anyone is failing to, cooperate or could not continue, I would send a private email, which works pretty good. But then the moderating team or moderating person who is doing it will analyze and summarize what dialogues from all different responses. And then when I look at this summary, and also I'm lurking in the discussion, I'm seeing what they're doing, and it gives me a pretty good idea how I can do my assessment of how a student-led discussion went.
Alice, I think you've got a little bit different view of this one.
I actually did interpret this scenario much differently, and I thought of these items as student-created in terms of student-led, and they might be things or activities such as students actually create the review or quiz criteria or items, or that they could create or construct criteria for a project review. So in essence, they'd be creating rubrics also. And another student-led or instructional role that the student might take is in peer review of others' products.
Linda, how about you?
Well, half of my class is face-to-face and half is online. When we go online, it moves from me as sort of the central figure to the students. It becomes much more learner-centric. And students have two roles in the online seminars. One is as a discussant for however many weeks. If we're online for 5 or 6, let's say 6 weeks, 5 weeks they're a discussant, and 1 week they're a moderator. And I'm going to talk about the moderating role. Once you become a moderator, 30% of your grade is assigned to the quality of your work in moderating. 10% is for the quality of the introduction, the presentation that you give to the students on day 1. 10% is for the quality of the monitoring, how well you advance the discussion, and make sure that it's not repetitious, that you bring in weaving and other kinds of techniques to move the discussion ahead. And 10% for the quality of the summary. Students are asked to summarize and reflect on what worked, what didn't, what would they do differently next time that they moderated. So I have this kind of methodology for studying student-led discussions. I want to say it's a really, I mean, not necessarily my methodology, but student-led discussions is really a powerful teaching and learning technique. So I really encourage people to consider it if they haven't.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Let's continue with our next scenario, exploring forms of assessment.
A professor teaching an online course strives to get her students to demonstrate a deeper understanding of concepts through their demonstration of good analytic and evaluative skills, as well as the development of knowledge, concepts, and ideas. She understands that her assessment of their work needs to align with these goals. What are some creative and effective assessment tools to encourage the development of these skills?
What are some creative and effective assessment tools to encourage or evaluate the development of these skills? Why don't you start us off, Badrul?
Well, in my courses, what I ask students to do is that every chapter, every article that you read as your reading assignment, I would like you to write your reflections on those with respect to the practical aspects to it. For example, I tell them, suppose you're working for an institution and your institution is interested in implementing e-learning, and you are a member of that e-learning planning team, and you've been sent to a e-learning conference for a week. Upon returning from the conference, you have been asked to write your reflections of every presentations that you win. And in your newsletter, if you write it and they think that they will benefit from what will be working, what will not be working for the institution. So I ask the student treat each reading assignment as if that you went to a conference presentation. And then my students write the summaries and reflections of their understanding of that the concept from the particular article and chapters with respect to what they will be able to use that in their organization. So it's more like a reflection of their learning and relating it to the practical aspects. And by looking at that, it helps me to evaluate their work and assess their performance.
Alice, anything to add?
I do. On page 21 of the packet, I've also included an example of a reflection journal. And just a technological point, if you may or may not in your software or course management system have a journaling tool, but you can easily set up a reflection journal online by creating private threads for learners in a particular course.
Linda?
Well, how do I assess learning and encourage critical thinking? I have a theory of learning that I also share with the students about how collaboration contributes to effective learning. And definitions from the literature, from the research literature, from the theory literature say that collaborative learning equals intellectual convergence, so that through debate, through discussion, we come to some point where we understand each other. We don't necessarily have to agree. We can even agree to disagree. But what we've done is through what I have identified as three processes. We go from divergence to convergence. We start with idea generating, which is like brainstorming. People start off with, I think, oh no, my position is, so there's a lot of I. And then as they start to hear one another, especially in the online environment, and there's a record of it, pretty soon they start saying, oh, gee, Rena, I sort of agree with that, but Alice, I'm not sure about that. And there begins to be this idea clustering where we begin to see commonalities that are either different from ours or that elaborate or support ours. So now we're in phase two where we start, our learning has gone ahead. Now we see different common positions. And as we continue to debate, provide evidence, seek to substantiate our own arguments, like Alice or Badrul can say, well, Linda, that's really interesting, but I don't agree with that. Now I'm forced to either say, oh, that's a bad idea, I'll chuck it, or, well, no, here's why, and I give evidence for it. That's where we move to the third, what is defined as learning, which is intellectual convergence. We have now come to an understanding, we have common language, a common source of ideas, and we agree or disagree. Now, once that's online, we can study it. When my students are debating or discussing, I can watch them move. Are they stuck just in idea generating and I, or are they moving to in reply to Rena or in reply to, and then are they finally moving to some conclusions, some co-productions? Are they coming up with conclusion statements? So I find, again, the discourse, when they're doing online discussion, to be very helpful to illuminate learning and problem solving.
We got a faxed question from Anne from UNC Charlotte that I think relates to what you're talking about here. She asks, we make the assumption that students know group process, prerequisite of collaboration. Where do they learn it?
Same place they learn critical thinking, the same place that they, exactly, that was my earlier point. We meta-analysis, all the things that we expect post-secondary and even secondary students to know, unless it's by osmosis. We really haven't put that into the learning program. And so if it isn't available in a non-formal way at the university, then it becomes part of our responsibility as instructors to support that. And I'm always on the lookout for books on critical thinking, on collaborative learning, on assessment, to help me help my students better, because not only are students not being trained in it, but we as faculty haven't been trained in it. And I think that's a really essential point, that that's why it's really good that we're building these packets and having opportunities to share amongst ourselves to address these really key issues.
Great. Alice, are there any helpful approaches to integrating other assessment choices into online environments?
Yes, and I included a series of a wide range of choices on page 14, and I want to make one point about that. And that would be that there are activities that really are opportunities for feedback, and that's our practice assessment, so to speak. And there are the ones that we think of as higher stake or a lot more points assigned, etc. And those are the end, some end point, if we want to use that word, summative assessment. But what we see on the page 14, many of those could be used in either one of those categories. And again, I just want to express that assessment is a continuum. It's where we have students start working with the content, and then we give them feedback about it. We can discern whether they might be needing more coaching related to that content or more resources, and then they apply it in more of a summative way.
Okay. Alice, before you mentioned the two-part way of grading collaborative work, and we have a question from Colette at UNT Research Park. And she asks, are you placing equal emphasis on group participation and final product? How do you keep focus on final product as opposed to focusing on the individual? And what percentage, if any, do you utilize to make this decision?
And I would say it really depends on the individual faculty and perhaps the goals in the course also in informing that decision. If I really I think that, again, a very important reason for placing group projects in courses is to help learners develop the skills for working in groups. Then my instinct would be to place more emphasis on the process itself. Also, I think an earlier point that Rena and Linda both made were, is there a way to help people understand the process or make decisions about their group process at the beginning in laying ground rules, like will the group live with their group vote or consensus on the grade they're going to give themselves for the process.
We're really talking about outcomes at this point, and so let's take a look at this question a little further in the next scenario called outcomes-based assessment.
An online instructor teaches at a school which is redefining their curriculum with outcomes-based objectives. In so doing, the institution is de-emphasizing the use of tests and quizzes in favor of other forms of assessment. He is not sure what this means in terms of his assessment practice and how to incorporate outcomes-based assessment into his course. Does this instructor really need to give up the use of tests and quizzes?
Does this instructor really need to give up the use of tests and quizzes? That's a good question, and it's very controversial in some institutions. Alice, your thoughts on that?
Well, the short question, or the short answer to that question is not necessarily, and it really would depend on what are the appropriate assessments for the goals for that course. I think for the participating institutions out there, some curriculum or programs that come to mind are career technology courses that incorporate standards-based programs. Also, if there are professional certifications at your institutions, those are often outcomes designed. And additionally, other systems have come forward and said, let's define our courses by competency or outcomes. So, short question is, or short answer related to that would be, what are the statements related to your questions that define at what level students will be able to demonstrate their knowledge or their ability with the content when they're finished with a particular learning experience? And if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, you would start with the more concrete levels of knowledge and move up into application and then evaluation. And in the later, the 2001 Krathwohl revision, the creation of new knowledge. So that the verbs that you place into the outcomes for particular courses actually are the roadmaps for creating assessments of those outcomes.
Great. Badrul, any additional thoughts?
Well, first of all, we have to follow what institution's policy is. So I know as an instructor, I have own teaching style, teaching philosophy. However, looking into the institution's policy, I might be in conflict with my philosophy of teachings. As long as I'm working for this institution, we can compromise, we can minimize that conflict by, for me to look into other way of assessing my students' learning and still following the institution's policy. So I would say that that's what I would do.
I think what you're saying is very interesting, and I think that when you say the word compromise, there are some ways to compromise that won't sort of go against institutional policy or hurt the students in any way, and will also demonstrate learning. For example, if you're giving a final exam, that final exam doesn't have to be multiple choice.
True.
It could be a short answer or an essay exam. It could be an open book exam where some of the objectives of the course are assessed and it meets institutional demands. So what does this mean for faculty? Any of you? What are some other equally effective assessment formats that can be used in, and can tests be used in this environment effectively?
It's the objective test format probably has a couple aspects to it, and that is even higher level items can be, higher level such as application or evaluation can be written into, say, a case study that has some choices. Open-ended responses would be another way to handle that. So we can say, yes, you can use some of those objective formats, and also the technology can be a way that we can manage some of those formats. And I would say that if you're in a course management system and you're using test tools, that if you have a mix of objective items with feedback, that you could put those into one test bank, and actually the short essay or the essay questions could be put into another test in that same unit, so students can get immediate feedback on some while you are providing the longer feedback on the others.
I just want to build on that.
I just wanted to say we're getting so many incredible questions and faxes and emails that what we really want to be able to do is to move on a little bit in the program so that we allow time towards the end of the show so that we can get to some of these questions and emails, if that's okay with the panel. I don't know that I need to tell you this because the questions are coming in like crazy, but once again, to talk to any of us, give us a call at 1-800-745-0371 or fax your questions to us at 972-669-6633 or by email to starlink@dcccd.edu. So let's go to our next scenario, the assessment continuum.
A professor agrees assessment requires attention to learning outcomes, but is equally concerned about the students' experiences that lead to those outcomes. He is still struggling with creating reflective activities that will allow him to periodically determine how students are doing in the course and if any changes need to be made along the way. What are some means by which he might include ongoing reflection and assessment in his online course?
We've touched on some examples of reflection in response to previous scenarios, but what are some other means by which an instructor might monitor ongoing progress and provide feedback to a student? Linda, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think I've talked about how we would do discourse analysis. And I guess what we're really thinking about is what's the role of learning and what's the role of university. And if you take a more, not a foundational view, but you take a look at the role of university is helping students become members of a knowledge community. So they come into the university, and during the process of 4 or 5 years, they learn to become a member of that knowledge community that they hope to join when they graduate. So if they want to be a mathematician from year 1, what we teach them is how to talk like a duck and how to walk like a duck. We teach them analytical terms. And so by the end of a course, they're, compared to the beginning, at the end, they're using more of the analytical terms of the particular discipline that they're hoping to participate in, and they're applying those analytical terms. And I think those are the kinds of things that we want to encourage, and that's why transcript analysis or discourse analysis is so helpful to see that students are using these terms appropriately. And you can expect that at the end of the course, more people are using more of these analytical terms appropriately than at the beginning. At the beginning, you'll have discourse, like I said, that's divergent, using all sorts of words. Towards the end, again, they'll be using the analytical terms of their knowledge community. And increasingly, over each course and over each year, till they graduate and become a mathematician or a duck. No.
Alice, how about you?
I think the shortest thing that I can say about this is a logistical one, and that is to add to the kinds of practice that Linda's talking about, an opportunity for feedback or coaching toward the development of joining a knowledge community would be the use of classroom assessment techniques. And Angelo and Cross wrote widely and in a very specific way about classroom assessment techniques. So an example is that a discussion topic might be post a 1-minute response to the content we've just developed, or post your muddiest point about this subject we're covering. Pages 19 and 20 provide some or detail the logistics of bringing the cats into the online environment. So I would just like to pass at this point on that subject.
Okay. Badrul? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I use some technique because I know many times I have seen students, they don't have any project ideas. So what I ask them to do, I create a general discussion area in the learning management system, and I ask the student, why don't you post your ideas? And others, provide feedback, and I provide feedback. So after some time, the project idea is refined, and this is I call ongoing feedback for improvement. So we can come up with our own innovative ways to install some of this mechanism in the virtual space that will help ongoing improvement for our students' learning.
I think also it's important to sort of build a process for them. I think that's what everybody has been saying with these examples, is that asking students, for example, to submit pieces of their final project along the way rather than just waiting to the end of a course and getting that final paper from them can be helpful. And it helps to sort of scaffold their learning. It builds a foundation under their learning so that it becomes more incremental.
We're also teaching them a process, as you pointed out, and that's something they can carry forward as an additional metacognitive skill.
Right. I think at this point we're going to go to our next scenario that is more specific to recognizing who is doing the work online, a very thorny issue.
After a recent faculty development workshop, a professor returns to her institution enthusiastic about replacing her tests and quizzes with a number of different assessment tools. She worries, though, that these changes will compromise the integrity of her online course and is concerned that without proctored exams, she won't be able to identify if her students are actually doing the work. How can she know if her student has done their own work online?
So, how can she know if her students have done their own work online, Alice?
Well, some of the basic or widely agreed upon good assessment practice is that we have multiple types of interactions with learners, and out of that comes the sense of who that learner is. So it isn't just a one project shows up for the big grades. Also, as you mentioned earlier, that scaffolding piece where we have such things as online conferences where people or different discussion topics where people over a timeline are presenting various developments that will culminate in a larger project.
Badrul, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yes, as you know, over time, students will develop tone and voice and consistency in their writing. So when the instructors are really engaged and involved, they can recognize the students from begin with and how they are progressing. So in my courses, I do not have that problem that students are not doing the work, because at the beginning, we get the tone and voice and consistency to know their final project is really the same students who started working with me to begin with.
Right, good point. Linda, any additional thoughts that you have on this?
No, just that one thought, which is that a discourse-based, discussion-based course is different from a traditional course that's transmission model, in which if I give you the information, then I want you to give it back to me. So there's an exam, there's a product, and those are more, I think, there's more problematic in terms of plagiarism or other kinds of issues. When it's discussion-based and the topics are always evolving every day and students have to make 3 or 4 or 5 comments a week, then it really is the tone of the voice. You can see the integrity. You can see them applying the analytical concepts or not over time. So it's a very different context, and I think it reduces the kinds of problems that traditional classroom assessment has encountered.
I would agree. I think it makes it more about learning than it is about the grade.
Yeah.
You're not asking, not being asked the question, is that on the final exam? Because that's not the way that the class is being assessed. Alice, you talked about proctoring a little earlier. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of proctoring and non-proctoring? And when is proctoring appropriate in an online course? You talked some about that before.
I think that I'll go straight to the question about when is it appropriate to have proctored exams. And clearly, if there's a certifying agency for a particular program, and some of us do have professional certifications associated with our programs, that it's not uncommon, and it would be very appropriate, or we know that it's one of the conditions of granting that certification to have the outside proctoring done. Personally, I have not been in the practice of proctored examinations. Again, if it's affiliated with some outside agency or something that has to be demonstrated in a physical context, yes, that would be, I guess, another condition that I would support. And I have written protocols for that. So who's the appropriate observer? What's the rubric? I think that I think that having to have a person in the room, again, those limitations I've just described are probably the ones that I would support, and the other ones I would say, what are these other appropriate things we've been talking about that don't require proctoring, because we have multiple ways of ensuring someone's authentic participation. I think even in physical classes you would find people saying, how do we authenticate the person doing the work? So I guess I got a little bit off there, but...
Well, as we promised, we want to save some time for your questions, and there are a stack of them. So at this point, we are going to move on to our final scenario so that we leave time for your questions. And then we will take your questions after the scenario.
An instructor wants to explore new ways to support and assess effective learning in her online course. After consulting with some of her colleagues with more online experience, she has come to believe that effective online learning incorporates such approaches as real-world perspectives, case-based analysis, and collaborative learning. How can she align these pedagogical designs with effective assessment?
How can she align these pedagogical designs with effective assessment? Badrul, your thoughts on this?
Well, in my courses, I encourage the student to do the group projects in the real-world situation. One of my courses at GW I taught called Program Evaluation. And my student used this 8-dimension I earlier mentioned about the e-learning, and they used this criteria to review online programs about 6 academic institutions in the U.S. and Canada. And the way they did that is it was a semester-long project. They would work directly with all the individuals involved in online education in those institutions, and they're working with the real client. That include provost, deans, chair, program directors. So I kept a mechanism to give them my feedback on the status of their project with the real-world project. And at the same time, their contact person would send me an email and give me some feedback. So based on their project reports and input from the clients or the contact person, I was able to make a good judgment of how realistic and relevant their learning goals for the specific project. And I must say that I'm very excited having students to do online projects. And it's easy to do that. They use email, sometimes telephone, and virtual spaces for chatting, and all the documents about online programs are available online, and resources. They could review them, so it saves their money and time even go to on site.
Great. Alice, any other thoughts or examples?
Well, I did think of a couple of examples, and one is where you would have a web-based or web design class producing products for nonprofits, and I've actually viewed some of those projects. Another example in writing would be that rather than, a paper and argumentation, that students would actually take a news item and write a letter to the editor using an argumentation format.
Linda, any additional thoughts?
Yes, I have some examples, and then I also have some cautions or some limitations. So generally, some of the ways that I align real-world design with assessment, which isn't easy, because real-world design is easier to do than having people from the outside come in and give you feedback. Some that I've used is to have guest speakers. Like just last week we had Peter Shea as a guest speaker in one of my online seminars, and then he reads the transcripts, he responds to the moderators and the students, and also he gets a copy of their final paper, so he gives feedback in that way. Now that's very exciting for the students and valuable. I've used panels like in workplace training, where after a while the learners have to do a role play in front of their actual bosses or the executive, who assess how well. This is in the case of loan officers working in a bank, where they role play the different tasks. So they've gotten feedback that way. I think that online participation in discussions and online participation in work projects is also a form of real-world design and assessment, because in the real world they will have to communicate with one another online. They will have to collaborate. They will have to do team projects. One person in Bangladesh, one in Vancouver, one lucky person in Brazil, you know. And I hope that would be me. So that also is real world. Just briefly, the limitations are, it sounds like a great idea to bring in panelists and experts, but it's a lot of work for the instructor, and also after a while the panelists and the experts start to evaporate because it's a lot of work for them. So it's a nice to have, but it isn't always a can have, just to get them. And secondly, just a word of caution is, let's not be afraid to use some traditional forms of assessment, even with real-world designs, even with collaborative learning. There's a lot of really good conventional assessment tools and resources out there that we can apply. It's not like it's verboten to use these conventional tools. Let's try to get the most powerful, most effective set of tools available to us as instructors and for the learners.
I understand we have a caller from Northwest Arkansas Community College.
Hello? Yeah. We're calling from Keith Pratt country. Rena might know where this is. And I just had a general question about, it's an excellent program, and I wondered if the suggestions that the speakers are providing today are more based on their own personal experiences, or is there much research evidence to back up a lot of the points they're making today? And secondly, is there some way to continue this conversation with some type of a discussion group or something? Because there's so many people listening out here that probably have questions and would like to continue this discussion. And do you have any suggestions for that? Thank you very much.
Linda, would you like to take the research end of things?
I will. So thank you, caller. I think that's an excellent question. And one of the points I want to make, because I'm just writing a history about e-learning, is that one of the characteristics that of e-learning practice since the early 80s has been that there has frequently been a research component. So I remember even in the mid-80s or late 80s when I'd be presenting, one of the things that people who invited me would always comment on is how valuable it is to have the research evidence, that I had both the practice and the research. Also, I was leading for almost 10 years the Telelearning Network of Centers of Excellence, which was over $50 million, and we had 225 different public and private sector partners and 30 universities. So there's a lot of research out there. Based on your good question, I think we should continue to invite people to go out and share the research, read the research, Alice has mentioned many sources when she's been presenting, and it really is, we're at a stage right now of evidence-based practice. So let's learn the evidence, because there's a lot of good research data. And in terms of continuing this discussion, have you got a budget?
We have gotten, as you can see by all the blue paper in front of me, several emailed questions, etc. There are a couple of mathematics instructors who have faxed or emailed questions to us, and one of them is from Richard at Lincoln Land Community College, and what he asks is, given the demands authentic assessment places on faculty time, is there a place for automated assessment in higher education, particularly in domains such as mathematics? Learning management systems afford such capabilities, so should we make use of them?
And I would say yes, and with this caveat, and because publishers are also, I mean, first of all, yes, it is appropriate, again, relative to the goal or outcomes of the course, that you could use course management system features to have objective or otherwise structured test items. And test banks make possible such strategies as randomization. Additionally, publishers are very much part of that content. And with that, I provide this caveat: if you're using publisher content, the faculty still needs to review the items, because sometimes they are inaccurate or they aren't appropriate for what it is you want to measure.
I'd like to just speak briefly. I think that's a really good question. In the assessment, we've really focused today on collaborative learning, but I think sometimes we also need to do some kind of assessment of individual learning. I mix some assignments are individual, some are collaborative, and also I do use sometimes a quick and easy form of quiz just to give students feedback quickly and more easily. So I don't think it's all or none. It's a judicious balance, and that's kind of the sort of Democles.
We only have time, unfortunately, for one more question. Our time has just flown this afternoon, and this one is an interesting one from Phyllis at the Community College of Denver, who asks, regarding private journals and reflections, would those be more effective in the public forum, as in discussions, or kept private between the instructor and the student? Since we want to foster collaborative work and critical thinking skills, would these types of activities be more effective in public? Badrul?
Yes, I think it would be nice to have others see what our students' reflections are. In my course, students write reflection on their readings, and other students are reviewing them and provide some feedback and ask questions. So it can extend their learning in a more higher level. So I would think it should not be very private. It should be very transparent, open to the learning community. The whole class is a learning community. And I must say that virtual education has got more learning community than in the face-to-face classes because of the limited of 4 walls and scheduled time. But once post a reflection there and is there asynchronously, students can reply to that, have more time to think and write, and have more resources to search and provide better feedback. So I think it's all good thing. For whoever did the facts, I will encourage you to make it very, very transparent and get everybody involved in everybody's learning.
Yeah, I would agree, and it also teaches us as instructors to get a whole lot better at how we give feedback to our students if that's going to be viewed publicly.
I have I just have a middle response on that, and that is, I allow people to be unself-conscious in the reflective journal, and I say use whatever you would like here in the public discussion. So
you give them the option.
The middle road,
yeah,
yes.
Sort of a middle road. although I was trying to cut things off, we do have just a little bit of time, and there was another question actually about sharing papers publicly. And Alice, I think you had some ideas on peer review, did you not?
Yes. The institution I'm at and in my own practice as a comp teacher, we do have people share drafts. And also, this is first year writing, so some people have experience with peer review and some do not, as you were talking about in social process. So we actually provide a framework of questions that are also informing the learner what to look for in their own writing as part of the peer process also.
Linda, what are your thoughts on the public-private end of things, keeping things public or private?
I guess I have mixed feelings about the journals. I can see what Badrul is saying about the value of active learning, and certainly I'm a proponent of active learning and group discussion. There may be moments, though, when a private reflection is more appropriate and people might feel comfortable. So I think it depends on the learning design and, again, a judicious balance between the two.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that really is all the time we have today for your questions, and boy, there have been some great ones. But remember, you're welcome to send any further questions by email to starlink@dcccd.edu, and we promise someone will get back to you. I want to thank all the panelists for joining me today. It's been a great discussion. Just around the corner is Starlink's next broadcast. On December 1st, join moderator William Wenrick as he hosts Teaching Adults, a practical guide for educators, with panelists Raymond Vladowski, director of the Center for the Study of Accelerated Learning at Regis University, and from Nova Scotia, another Canadian colleague, Leona English, an associate professor and chair of the Department of Adult Education at St. Francis Xavier University. This program should be interesting to both traditional classroom instructors and online educators because, as we know, adult learners are online learners. To learn more about this program and the programs for the new year, visit the Starlink website at www.starlinktraining.org for more information. Now, to everyone joining us, again, we thank you. We wish you a great day and a very happy Thanksgiving for those of you in the U.S.
Yeah.